I'm a recent college graduate struggling to find my footing in the world. Times have been tough, especially with the pandemic going on. About 2 months ago, I decided to get a puppy to help me through these challenging times. Enter my 11-week-old purebred Pembroke Welsh Corgi, complete with his adorable fluffy tail. Now, I know what you're thinking. Don't Pembroke Corgis usually have docked tails? Well, yes, but I'm not a fan of the practice unless it's medically necessary. So I specifically sought out a breeder who left the tails intact. Little did I know this detail would play a part in the chaos that was about to unfold. Living in an apartment without a yard, I have to be creative with exercising my energetic little fur ball. He hasn't had all his shots yet, so I'm extra cautious about where I take him. Usually, I walk him around the building a few times and he's such a good boy that he never leaves my side. One day, I decided to venture a bit further to pick up a package from our apartment complex parcel hub. It was my pup's first time exploring this area, so I made sure to keep him on a leash and close to me. The walk there was uneventful, and he was having the time of his life sniffing every new smell. After collecting my package, I started heading back home. That's when I saw a family in swimming gear pull up, likely heading to the complex pool. I didn't think much of it and picked up my puppy, carrying him in one arm and my package in the other. Suddenly, their kid, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, came rushing towards us. I tried to stop him by lifting my leg slightly and politely asked him to keep his distance. I explained that there was a pandemic going on and that my puppy needed space to stay safe. The kid ignored me completely and kept coming closer. I raised my voice and told him to back up. That's when the mom heard me and came storming over. She angrily demanded that I apologize for yelling at her son. She also insisted that I let her son pet what she mistakenly called my husky puppy. I calmly corrected her, explaining that my puppy wasn't a husky but a corgi. I also told her that he hadn't had all his shots yet, and for his safety, I asked her to please keep her distance. I just wanted to go home at this point, but the woman wasn't having it. She got right in my face and tried to grab my puppy from my arms. He started yapping in fear, and I instinctively pulled him closer and turned away. I warned her to back off, telling her that she was scaring my puppy. I made it clear that if she got any closer, I would use defensive force to protect myself and my puppy. I told her and her child to back off and leave us alone. The woman went ballistic at this point, screaming and yelling. Her kid started crying and then tried to grab my puppy's tail. In the commotion, my poor pup slipped through my arm and fell to the ground. I screamed as both the woman and her kid tried to pick him up. Panicking, I fumbled for my keys, where I keep a small pepper spray. Without thinking twice, I sprayed the woman. Both she and her kid started screaming even louder. I quickly scooped up my puppy and ran home as fast as I could. Once safe inside, I checked my little guy over. He was clearly shaken up, but thankfully not hurt. I changed my clothes and spent the next hour just holding him close, trying to soothe both of us. Later that day, I called the apartment complex office to report the incident. To my relief, they had security footage of the whole thing. They're now looking for the woman and have assured me they'll take appropriate action. I've also decided to keep a lawyer on standby, just in case. I grew up in a military family, and around cops, I was always taught to give a clear verbal warning before using any defensive measures. I'm not a violent person, but after being attacked in public several times before, I've learned to carry either a pepper spray or a taser for protection. This incident has definitely changed how I'll approach our walks in the future. I've ordered some protective booties for my pup to wear outside, and I'll be keeping him on a leash at all times now, even when I'm carrying him. We'll stick to walking around the building for now, and I'll only take him out during the quietest times of the day. I have a vet appointment coming up for his next round of boosters and a general checkup. I'm also planning to slowly socialize him with my nephew, who's a gentle child and will be a much better introduction to kids than that entitled brat. For now, I'm just grateful my little corgi is okay and back to his playful self. He's even herding me to his treat jar as I write this. I guess some things never change, tail or no tail. I've been in the Scouts for about 5 years now. It's been a great experience overall. I've learned a lot of useful skills, made some good friends, and had some fun adventures. But nothing could have prepared me for the disaster that was our recent camporee. A few weeks ago, when our scout troop decided to attend this big camporee event, I was pretty excited because they were advertising a scout-themed escape room as the main attraction. I'm a huge fan of escape rooms. The puzzles, the teamwork, the rush of solving clues before time runs out. So I was really looking forward to it. The day of the camporee arrived and only about a quarter of our troop showed up. We were a pretty small group, but that was okay. There were tons of other troops there, way more than the organizers seemed prepared to handle. But we tried to stay positive. Saturday afternoon finally came and it was time for the escape room. We headed over only to find another troop had gotten there first. Our troop leader tried to be diplomatic about it. He asked the other troop if they would like to join forces and tackle the escape room together, suggesting it could be fun. But the other troop was having none of it. They responded with strong refusals, using harsh language and insulting terms to make it clear they had no intention of sharing the escape room with us. We were pretty bummed, but what could we do? We wandered around aimlessly for a while, hoping maybe we get another chance later. But then the skies opened up and it started pouring. And I mean pouring. The rain didn't let up for hours. So much for the escape room. Later that evening, around 7:30, all the troops gathered in the mess hall for a movie night. The leaders were trying to salvage the day, give us something fun to do since all the outdoor activities were rained out. At first, I was excited. Maybe the day wouldn't be a total loss after all. Remember that rude troop from earlier? They were sitting right behind us, and they seemed determined to ruin the movie for everyone. They were yelling, making obnoxious noises, clapping randomly, throwing water bottles at other troops. At one point, they started hitting me and my friend in the back of the neck. It was infuriating. I turned around to see who was causing all the trouble, and sure enough, it was the same bunch who'd hogged the escape room earlier. My friend tried reasoning with them. He pointed out that their behavior wasn't following the scout oath or laws and politely asked them to calm down. Their response? They pelted him with water bottles. I decided to try a more direct approach. I told them bluntly to shut up and sit down, pointing out that they were ruining the movie for everyone. That's when things got really ugly. They started spewing the most vile, crude jokes imaginable, touching on topics that made my skin crawl. It was way over the line, but we were stuck there for the whole 90-minute movie, enduring their awfulness. After the movie, I was seething. As we were leaving, I noticed one of the troublemakers was wearing his official scout shirt. I casually maneuvered around so I could see their troop number, then approached their ringleader. I gave him a piece of advice, warning him that the next time he upset someone, he shouldn't let them know how to get back at him. I walked away without another word, leaving him puzzled. I immediately reported everything to my scoutmaster, and my troop mates backed me up. He went to talk to their scoutmaster, but I don't know what came of that conversation. The next morning at the closing ceremony, I noticed their troop flag had the name of their chartered organization, the church that sponsors them. I kept that information to myself, not wanting to tip them off. As soon as I got home, I sat down and wrote the most scathing letter I could muster to that church. I laid out in excruciating detail exactly what kind of behavior they were supporting. I figured hitting them where it hurts, their reputation and possibly their funding would have a much bigger impact than any face-to-face confrontation. I never heard directly what happened to those scouts, but I've noticed their troop hasn't shown up to any multi-troop events since then. I can only hope the church took appropriate action and that those bullies learned a lesson about the true meaning of being a scout. My brother and I were thick as thieves, always joking around and having a good time. We had this knack for playing off each other's energy, which often led to some pretty hilarious situations. When I started high school in 1975, I was excited but nervous. My brother was already there, 2 years ahead of me. We thought we'd be in separate classes, giving us a chance to make our own friends and have our own experiences. But fate had other plans. We got our class schedules in the mail, and wouldn't you know it, they put us in the same French class. We looked at each other and just knew this was going to be trouble. We tried to be responsible about it though. We went to the school counselor and asked for a schedule change. The counselor told us that they couldn't change our schedules at that point and that we'd just have to make the best of it. We tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. So we shrugged it off and decided to roll with it. What happened next was just, well, let me tell you. A few weeks into the semester, we were covering a unit on health in French class. You know, those silly phrases you'd never actually use when learning a new language. At the same time, there was this popular song on the radio by Labelle called Lady Marmalade. It had this catchy French phrase in it. Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? Now, being the studious siblings we were, and I say that with a hefty dose of sarcasm, we decided to have a little fun with our newfound French knowledge. My brother leaned over to me with a mischievous grin and asked me in French if I wanted to sleep with him tonight. I giggled as I responded straight from our textbook, saying in French that I had a headache. We thought we were being clever, you know, just a couple of siblings joking around. But our teacher, she was not impressed, not even a little bit. Before I knew what was happening, I was being marched to the principal's office. My brother, he got to stay in class. Can you believe that? I was fuming. The principal informed me that they had called my mother to come pick me up. He said I was suspended for 3 days for inappropriate behavior in class. I was shocked. Suspended? For that? It seemed so unfair, especially since my brother was equally involved. But you know what? My mom thought it was ridiculous too. My mom reassured me, saying we'd make the best of these 3 days. And boy, did we ever. My mom is the coolest. Instead of making me sit at home, she took me along on her errands. One day, we ended up at the mall. And that's when things got interesting. We saw these amazing platform sandals with hidden roller skates. You could just pull a lever, and boom! instant skates. My mom got this mischievous look in her eye, the same one I often saw in the mirror. My mom suggested we buy the shoes, saying that if they were going to suspend me for silly reasons, we might as well give them a real one. She bought the shoes, and I wore them on my first day back. I walked into the lunch line like nothing was different, then casually rolled out with my tray. Of course, I ended up right back in the principal's office. The principal told me my behavior was unacceptable and that he was calling my mother again. But when my mom showed up, she wasn't upset at all. In fact, she looked like she was trying not to laugh. My mom sarcastically told the principal that since they suspended me for speaking French in French class, she figured we'd give them a more concrete reason this time. The principal's face turned red, but he couldn't say much. He just dismissed us, and I rolled right out of his office and into another 3-day suspension. As we left the school, my mom high-fived me. My mom told me that sometimes you got to stand up to unfair treatment, even if it means bending the rules a little. Those were some of the best days of my life. My mom showed me that sometimes the best way to deal with ridiculous situations is to be a little ridiculous yourself. And you know what? I think if the principal could have suspended my mom too, he would have. Let me tell you about something wild that happened with my dad recently. He's this old school guy, you know? Retired now, but he used to work as an accountant for like 40 years. Always been careful with his money, but also kind of stuck in his ways. He's got this thing about technology. Doesn't trust it much. Says the internet's full of scammers and whatnot. Anyway, a few months back, he decided he wanted to sell this old Rolex watch he had. It was a gift from his own dad way back when, but he never really wore it much. Said it was time to let it go and make some extra cash. Now, this watch wasn't exactly in perfect shape. It had some scratches, and the band was a bit worn, but it still worked fine and, you know, it's a Rolex. Those things hold their value. So, I convinced him to try selling it on eBay. Took me forever to explain how it all worked, but we finally got it listed. I made sure he was totally honest about the condition in the description. We even took a bunch of close-up photos to show all the little imperfections. A week goes by and boom, someone buys it. Dad's all excited thinking he's finally getting the hang of this internet thing. He carefully packs up the watch and sends it off. Everything seems fine until a few days later when he gets this email from the buyer. Dad read the email aloud, sounding confused. I asked him what was up and he explained that the buyer was claiming the watch wasn't as described. The guy was saying Dad had hidden problems with the watch and was threatening to reverse the payment unless Dad paid for repairs. I was shocked, pointing out that we had been completely honest in our description. Dad agreed, suspecting the buyer was trying to scam him. I could see Dad was getting worked up, but then he got this glint in his eye. He told me he had an idea. Dad said he was going to play dumb and told me to watch what he'd do next. He starts typing out this response, acting all confused and apologetic, going on about how he's new to this internet selling business and doesn't quite understand how it all works. The buyer must have thought he'd struck gold with an easy mark. Next thing we know, the guy's actually spending his own money to ship the watch back to Dad. When it arrived, Dad didn't waste any time. He went straight to eBay and processed the return, refunding the guy's money. Of course, the buyer freaks out. He sent an angry message demanding to know what was going on. Dad replied with an apology, explaining that he thought returning the watch was what the buyer wanted, since he had complained about so many problems. He said he just wanted to make sure the buyer got his money back for such a disappointing purchase. The buyer angrily responded that he didn't want to return the watch. He wanted Dad to pay for repairs. Dad calmly explained that the sale had been canceled, the watch was back in his possession, and the buyer's money had been refunded. He suggested they both chalk it up as a learning experience about how eBay works. The guy kept trying to argue, but Dad just kept playing the confused old man act. Eventually, the buyer gave up. I guess he realized he'd been outplayed at his own game. After it was all over, Dad turned to me with the biggest grin I've ever seen. He boasted about still having a few tricks up his sleeve and warned me never to underestimate boomers. I was amazed, telling him I couldn't believe he'd pulled it off and calling him a genius. Dad modestly replied that while he might not know much about the internet, he knew how to deal with people trying to pull a fast one. He then suggested we relist the watch, joking that we should add a line about not accepting returns from buyers trying to scam old folks. We both had a good laugh about that. I gotta say, I've never been more proud of my dad. He might be old school, but he sure showed that scammer that you don't mess with someone just because they're older.